good evening. I'm Andrea Scarpino. I'm stepping in for Kenneth Pruitt tonight. Kenneth is our usual host at Poetry at the Point, but he is not able to be here. So I'm going to try to, shepherd us through our reading tonight in his stead. I want to start by just shouting out the members of St. Louis Poetry Center. This is a great organization to be a part of. There is some membership information at the back with a QR code and a website. So if you have any interest at all in poetry in the St. Louis region, grab some of that material before you leave. We also have in the back, both of our poets have brought books to sell. So at the end of the reading, I'm sure they would be happy to sign them and just stick around to talk to them a little bit about their work and their books. So a few housekeeping things. There are bathrooms out the hall door and to the left over there. You are welcome to buy drinks and food next door and bring it over if you would like to do so. We love to share that space with you all. If you are watching this on Facebook Live or on YouTube, hello, welcome. Comment, ask questions. We will have some period at the end just to chat with Jennifer and Sebastian. So please put in some questions, and you in the audience too. So I am going to just introduce both of the poets. Jen is going to read first, and then Sebastian, and then when we finish listening to their reading, we'll kind of open it up to some Q&A and talk a little bit more with them. So I will start with both of their bios. Jennifer Whalen is a poet and educator from the Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, Ohio area. She is the author of the poetry collection Evening Full, which was selected by Rick Barrett as the winner of the Light Scatter Press Prize. Her poems can be found in Gulf Coast, Denver Quarterly, 14 Hills, Six Finch, Grist, The Boiler, and elsewhere. She previously served as writer-in-residence at Texas State University's Clark House and currently teaches English at the University of Illinois, Springfield. And I had the pleasure of working with Jen at Springfield, and I can say she is a fabulous poet, so please pick up her book when we are done listening to her. Sebastián Páramo is the author of Portrait of Us Burning from Curbstone Books in 2023. He was named a finalist for the 2023 Best First Book of Poetry by the Texas Institute of Letters. His poems have recently appeared in Agni, Poetry Northwest, Prairie Schooner, New England Review, and elsewhere. Those are really fabulous magazines, if you don't know. They are really high quality, so also amazing work. His work has received fellowships and support from the Dobie Pisano Fellowship Program at UT Austin, Canto Mundo, among others. He is the founding editor of The Boiler and is a lecturer at Southern Methodist University. So those are our poets tonight, and I will welcome up Jen first. So come on up.
Hello. Are we good on the mic, or?
Do you want me to try to adjust
Yeah,
it?
that is not a skill I have.
Me neither, obviously. Is it higher? No. Is it too higher or no? Is it?
How are we doing?
Good.
Yeah, we're getting nods in the crowd.
Is that
All
better?
right. Can y'all hear okay?
Yes.
All righty. All right, so thank you so much to Andrea for the introduction, for Poetry at the Point for having us, and for Kenneth, who can't be here but did so much great work to make this event possible. I really appreciate it. I'm really happy to be here with you, Sebastian. We've been, sitting our books out around the same time, but have yet to get to read together, and I'm excited for it. So I'll talk to you about the book, but before I do that, I'm just going to jump right into a poem. This is called On Reserve. When I move through night, I carry a seashell in my pocket. It is good to have a delicate thing to protect. It is like dawn brushing night away in bluish streaks, but much lighter. If you try to photograph it, the blue looks pale and sickly, and suddenly it's morning. There is some scheme bigger than I'll ever reach that decides if I dance tonight. A spiraled whale's bone hangs from my neck on thick black string. It symbolizes infinity, but I won't ask it to stand for that. Our world is not a top, yet I believe in its spins. Sometimes I spin much faster than the world. I wear billowy dresses so the world can see. Unless the gifts you gifted are smaller than an envelope, I don't have them. It's a space I gave myself with limits at a time when I needed limits. Our city is sliced with train tracks. We call downtown the center, but it's just a phrase we use to feel cradled in canopies of noisy lights. There are no archives for people like us. If I meet you here, I'll have no method to separate you from any given walker. I can't tell you how to get here. It would be too risky, but you'll get there. Thank you. So I'm reading tonight from Evening Full. It was published in May from Light Scatter Press. And as you might be able to tell from the title and that last poem, a lot of the poems are musings on night or nighttime, and they take place in what I sometimes very clinically call nighttime social gatherings. So places not too dissimilar from this one. So restaurants, bars, where we can hear dishes clanging in the background. And it's thinking about nighttime as this threshold between day and night, but also of these settings of places of connection, of the threshold of connection. So what it means to take the interior, so our thoughts, our emotions, our desires, and to make those exterior and in that threshold as well. So I'm going to read one of those poems in that setting. This is Even in Disguise, and it's in 2 numerical parts. 1. Talk leans small over the balcony rails. Is this starlight member to some far-off nebula? Tell me the longevity of any given swan. I didn't belong there. Not that I didn't love swans and stars and parties. I did. I do. On twitchy summer days, I think there is a sun. I could do something worthwhile with my hands. Gum wrappers born new as tiny creased birds, party gifts to strangers on streets. But this night was different than that wanting. I wanted to fall in love with a daffodil for its daffodilness, not those fundamental facets that make it unlike a daisy. Others thought this wishy-washy, neither here nor there, like an unfolded, then refolded paperclip. I was neither my former love nor this newer loppy self, but this was a dinner party. Love was both in and out of the question. 2. When I plead to the bus not to crash its broadside into mine, I mean there are countless avenues. Impact is merely one. I could forgive a frog its lonely croaking, teach a sponge scrub the inside corners of an oven. It is better to believe our nebulae into some good warning. The stuff in the sky that makes dancing nights worth dancing. Someone in our midst who comes to learn my recipes, who longs to love my loves. This next poem is A Cantaloupe. I bought a cantaloupe, left it round on the counter. A small sign offered nourishment. It didn't transform into carriages. I stayed the same in wonderment. 4 nights, then 5, silent. Some wise women claim the fruit of the earth is always in the palm of the hand. I've never tasted a cantaloupe, unsure of what dish to make. It's warm in the room where I contemplate past love. How pleasant it seems with slight sweat on skin. How round is the cantaloupe. How unlike flowers or scented branches, potpourri, small candles. Can I fragrant a place into a home? I bought a cantaloupe, cut it down to small slices, like dismembering a chair or remembering a dead friend. How quickly I eradicated these things from me. Upset, I couldn't swallow them whole. So I thought I'd talk about some of the art in the book. Do you all like art? Yeah, it's pretty cool. So the base image of the collage cover here is a color blot by an artist by the name of Mary Gardside, so everything minus the disco ball here. And some of her other color blots serve really beautifully as section dividers throughout the book. And as I said, Mary Gardside was a color theorist and a painter, and she's regarded as the first woman to publish a theory of color. And she did this rather covertly in 1808. So it was put forward as this like painting manual for women, to do in their free time. And to put it in kind of context of color theory, so this is at a time of, the color wheel, so color in these very segmented terms, or Newton's, color prism. And then here she's making, these very organic experiences of color and the experience of light and shade. And I really appreciate that for her. And I've been drawn to color theory just as a kind of contemplation of thresholds, right? So kind of, when does blue stop being blue and start being green? And how to point to that is very arbitrary, but how I still kind of want to, right? I want to put language to that. And that's kind of the sweet spot my brain likes to live. So I think Mary Gardside is someone I appreciate for also capturing that in a different sphere. So this poem is called To Better Describe It. So it's in a similar vein of trying to describe something that we just don't have language for. To better describe it. The night, shameless thing brightened by breaking plates and dying candles, came less like a thief and more like a grief counselor on a TV set where an actress recently passed. Not that it was a distinctly somber evening or callous morning. Not that it wished to be reversed, but longed to be remembered at its most endearing. A clank of a glass scurried all useless noises away. I forgot the sound of running water, pages turning, creasing into companions. The smell was the crisp after rain, but it hadn't rained in weeks. Not that I was crazy, but the night had smoothed itself in such a way the impossible was possible again. When I realized the effortlessness it would take to extend this new feeling, I started touching. First the bar top, sticky, then smooth. Next curtains laced inside windows. Then I moved to crowd people, twirling inwards, then out. My limbs turned airy to compact into so many memories. I still search for words to better describe it. When asked, I invented professions, becoming a person who tests hard gelatin candies, sucking until my lips turn cherry red, then berry blue. The night's refrain, now a nascence of proof, a spun-out dance where it is easy to lie, when surely there was a time I could have been anything, but I ended up as this. A light. Every meadow is a lesson, wide span. The grass's stretch doesn't reach anywhere, just winds back in and touches itself. The closest person I love is 60 miles away. To be wrapped in familiar arms, I would wait an hour if they sped to me. I construct these little formulas to articulate my lonely. How long I've wanted my own empty dryer drum. Now having it, I wear 3 outfits a day, to even fill it every so often. When people mistake their tears solely for beauty, they've missed the center. Astronauts tearing at the size of the world, how they can cover its whole rounds with a thumb. No one wants to be useless, not even the world. My lonely will never know a lonely quite like its own. It is a photograph it can't zoom out of. The outermost I've seen the world is from an airplane. Snow-dipped tips of Rockies. My lonely was most of me that morning. I won't call the person 60 miles away. I'll love them when their headlights sweep my windows, but each inch moves in minutes, and if I feel fuller before their arrival, what will I explain? There's a teensy moth in the house, winging over and around my vision. Look how flighty and close it is. It thinks I am a light. So I told you this is a book that is interested in connection, and it's particularly interested in connection through the lens of being a woman, and particularly a young woman. So thinking about this act of sharing your thoughts, desires, and inner life in a society that often, just trivializes them, or they're made to be silly or dramatic or too much, just made unimportant in some way, where your desires for safety or bodily autonomy are somehow radical, right? What does it mean to exist in that space and be asked to disclose things and share yourself? So sometimes the poems kind of play with those personas, and sometimes they resist them, and sometimes I like to think they do both. This is The World Once. The world is too much tonight. Too much vibration, vibrato. The breeze is doing too much with the trees, the flag, the tablecloth, the grass. The sunset is loud and alarming. It is an overheard conversation about addiction. I am listening. I say, slow down. I say, loft loose. I sit stern with my hands clasped in my lap, so I am not another moving thing. I make the world a bargain. I have something to show you. If you don't stay in one place, you'll only see whiffs. I allow it admission to my body. I say, breeze, work your touch into my phrase, everything else away. The world is too much tonight. Its muchness is enough to wring me dry. I can't help but watch when no one is looking. Silly world, my eyes are your magnets. I think the world wants me to love it enough. I don't need my hands all over it. I think it wants me to watch a couple kiss each other's sunspots, nuzzle into embrace, then separate. I hope when Queen Elizabeth married England, she was thinking about fucking the world. The world won't tell me what it wants, but I think it likes when stepping from my car door, I quickly flush the pink of my underwear. It did this undulation in the leaves. It doesn't need party hat invitations. I think I owe the world a thank you. It didn't ask me to come here, to sit at this bar top and buy myself a drink. And yet I still came. All right, so this is going to be my last poem of the night. So again, another thank you to Poetry at the Point for having me, for Kenneth, and his great work in organizing, for Andrea for stepping in. I think Andrea You were the person in the hallway when I got like my first kind of finalist nod on my book, and I remember just kind of running to your office in a giddy state. So it's great to be with you here, and I'm so looking forward to your reading, Sebastian. So I'm going to end with a poem I've been ending on a really long time. It's called The Gold Door, and I've been ending on it well before this book was in this form. But one thing I really appreciate about the book being in this form is The Gold Door is actually the first poem in the book. So while we are kind of wrapping up our connection through this work tonight with The Gold Door, if you read it, you'll just pick up where we left off. So. Thank you again, and thank you all for being here and listening. This is The Gold Door. When I enter a gold door, I want to enter a gold door. Consider how a drawer only responds to specific tracks to align its wheels. I mean that upon entering the door, something grand should be waiting. I ask for small things of the array of things one can ask for. I ask nothing of the goldness of the door, that it sparkle in certain light, or like flakes revealing its initial finish. I ask nothing of how long I should be allowed inside, or in what manner I must interact. As in, when I enter a room of strangers, I ask to be greeted in a manner fitting to my entering. I will bring a bottle with a bow and exit empty-handed. These are expectations ingrained in the fabric of evenings. As in, when I enter a room of oranges, I wish to be wrapped in silk satin and remembered with such shimmer in times of trouble. To hold this thought is to meet on most necessary terms, like letting the moon stand as a symbol of night and therefore be less of night. The grand thing can be wrapped in a box or framed in the mind or written in lily water. It can be grand in that it is largesse or grand in that it is precise. It can greet me by name or be present in the palm. It can be orange in color or warped in form. When I enter a gold door, I want to be equal with what I meet. And then you will know. I've asked nothing of you. Thank you.
Hello, thank you.
I think you can lift it up.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you, Andrea and Poetry at the Point and Jen for having me here. I'm going to read some poems from Portrait of Us Burning. This book came out 2023, and they're poems about, it's loosely based on my life, but it's also a little bit dramatized. It's kind of like a telenovela a little bit. There's a lot of references to complicated relationships. But ultimately it's about storytelling and forgiveness, but I'll let the poems kind of speak for themselves. But this first poem, this is one of the opening poems, and this is the voice of the father in the book. Where your father, or this is the voice of the uncle, sorry. Where your father was. We lent each other tools. We learned the American tongue. We wingmanned and learned dancing on the ceiling. We showed off our phrase, our bailas con el amor. We gave the shove, said here's a job, patching roofs. We scaffolded frames. We built homes. We woke at dawn, kissed our wives, our newborns. We sent money back home. We remembered where our father worked. Once there was a power plant. He raised us on one knee. He said there's a whole sky waiting. Take its clouds, its rain, and drink it. We take that cloud, we save it for thirsty hearts. we gave it to you. So there's lots of references to sort of a dramatic family life. And portraits of us burning, the portraits refers to some ekphrastic poems, but also sort of snapshots of memory that, with memory, it's kind of, it's not perfect, right? And so these are kind of in that vein, or this is one of those poems that's kind of like in that vein. It's in the kind of looking back at childhood and talking about siblings. Hibiscus. If we roughhoused as brothers, we bleed and eat dirt. Younger days, we took fistfuls of teeth and held on tight. Wet mouth nuzzling my neck. Animal sibling, mud and breath of dog days. We knew each other. We traded cards and punches, collected frogs at dusk in Duck Creek Park. We stepped into it again. More wolf than cub now, ash and lime on Tecate cans, a pastor on tortilla flats, burning, charred, the touch of white frosting on birthdays, purpled creeks at night after everyone ate. Swollen belly, I can't move. I'm full and afraid of a time we won't jab and be cruel with love. I was once a wolf baring his teeth. I licked the salt off my lips and trembled to know the ache of soft ruby petals in my mouth. Hibiscus boiled. We must drink now like brothers. Let us make a pact. Let us reign over the woods again. Let us eat the flesh of game. We must devour spirits so dark they glow like worms and burn and steep in a kettle until every winter becomes dire with its whistle. So, I'm going to skip a little bit ahead. Self-portrait with thunder and exhaustion, or self-portrait as my father crossing. Sudden thunder and spell of rain, full night widening its throat. Soft music inside a black car, rivered roads and thick rain. The warm LED of Motel 6. You want headlamps and roads, stars to hang like bright molars scattered. Orion's chest slit by the white knife of a half moon. If your eyes are heavy, picture an open rib cage, a fistful of blood. Become one with the sternum of the road. Nod off. What brought you here? Something restless, something dark. You will follow its shoulder. You will go empty with high beams, the middle of nowhere. Nobody but silhouettes. Trees rustle in the wind, whispering, pray for lightning. Nobody but silhouettes. Trees, the hazards blink on and off and on. Engine hums and faith will keep you throttled, keep you from skidding. Let the sky be yours. Go home, kiss the mouth of dawn. So this is one of the more explicit ekphrastic poems, but it's kind of still in the same vein as the other portrait poems. This one's called Studying Abroad in Mexico, Looking Up at Man of Fire by Jose Clemente Orozco. Through a ceiling, the sun's flames shine through the man of fire. I saw him once in La Plaza de Tapachia. I wandered the streets of Guadalajara in July, an inferno. My feet burned and my head burned, and I was wiping sweat when I saw him. He was a human torch. His gray hands reached for mine like he's not sorry. Is this my father's love? His hands reddening me, whooping his fears out, burning flesh with anger, hot tears asking, why me? Why smolder when the forests are going to ash? This isn't about the world aflame. My own house has never been set ablaze. Though I've seen smoke, My mother chars peppers with enough heat. It licks my tears, makes my lungs scream. Orozco's flames were bigger than that. Chiloso or invincible, my father never called me those things. He could never stand the kitchen because I was jacketless in winter, trying to prove I didn't need anyone. My father called me Iceman. The way I stood in Guadalajara, its cantinas, lighting cigars foolishly, so I could tell him, don't extinguish this tall, licking flame. I want to die slowly, like murals peeling from the ceiling. Footage of my father telling a story about dirt. Tell me the story again, how you shaped clay into a toy. All you had was dirt. Such an old thing to have. I didn't believe you until I visited your childhood fields. You have the same bones as your stern father, your stoic mother. No wonder he ran away. I don't wonder anymore why you go to work for the grocer, restless boy. You killed boredom. You pictured the sky as more than a field of wheat. I didn't know you, Father. Were you too busy working, looking beyond the pasture? In the beginning, there was a story. You placed us like dolls inside a fenced backyard. My brother and I once played those figures in the shadows, as dinosaur, as transformer, as figures of action for the rivalry, clawing deep like memory, or digging out the dark, black crescent moons under our nails. I want something to uncover, to tell my children what I lacked, like my father. Like a magician, I will pull the thread of my father's thirst and teach my children to thirst for the blood of an open field leading back to their grandfather's grave. Maybe a few more poems. I'll skip ahead. I'll read one more poem from here, and then I have two poems from a new book that I'm working on. It's kind of like sort of a sequel to this book, but this one's called Cajeta. We always wanted a family. Didn't Father beg for us to act like one? He yelled at us to make plans. Don't take your sweet time. Don't get thick with me. Didn't he mean for his efforts to yield better blood than before, richer than before? We are rich with family. He says we're fine, yet his body tells me it's tired of the molasses of burden. Not sweet anymore, it burns. My mother's burden was once slow too. In Celaya, city of candied milk, she loved cajeta. How it simmered good and overnight. A cosmetology graduate, I once misunderstood her as someone who studied the stars and it ended up true anyway. She dressed and cut our hair for family portraits. The star of Texas and cloud played the backdrop. Her baby's first hair was sweetened inside a plastic bag, a drawer, something to burn the past in our hands when we hold it. Simmering like birthday candles. Remember, mama y papa, pastel de tres leches, cake of 3 milks. We put frosting on everyone's nose. Remember, brother, why don't we gather to make plans? Why take so long to meet once a year around a table? Why not feast and drink about the dreams we saw as boys? Climbing our city's roof when we didn't know how long fireworks lasted, because we lay there under July for what seemed like hours, and we joined the family and ate fajitas and drank soda and ate cake, and we even felt like a family, rich and without burden. So this book focuses a lot on personal history, and started to think about Texas history. That's where I'm from, that's where I grew up. But a lot of places have complicated histories, just like families do. And so I was kind of inspired to think about that for this new project that I'm working on. So here's one of those poems I'm working on. What I know of this life, is first impressions. When I was smaller, everyone seemed taller, faster, or they had better homes and gardens, higher ceilings, bright blue deep pools of what I envied. Imagine if I grew up and was named Tejas. Give me a suburban childhood, a pool circa 1991. My mother, Mexica, and my father, Cortez, they owned property and raised me in their likeness. One day, my neighbor David plays hopscotch on a blacktop. We traded cards ever since and played sports like lifelong friends. He once told me his father won a war, and I didn't know the word for bragging. What does your father do? He asked. How much blood did I leave out? And thank you again. This is a really lovely space. And it's really nice company. And I look forward to chatting with Jen about her books. So this one's a more fun poem, but this is also kind of inspired by Texas history, but also mythology. So this is called Mars and Ares. I'm the Tejano riding your horse without a saddle. I'm hanging onto horsehair. I'm the flame on your lasso. My horse kicks me up at the moon and I let go. I fall back to earth, all scorched. Cut me up like a jackrabbit. Let me land on piles of questions. Why was I born raging with the god of beginnings? It hurts. My fear makes me do bad things. I set fire to bridges because suddenly I can leap between cliffs with my hind legs. Call me the leaping Tejano. I swing from swings time and time again until I'm at a beach in Corpus Christi. Find me there, spreading the towel, taking off my shirt, slapping SP40 all over. I'm lying on my stomach, my back against the sun. Here's a picture of me soaking life into my browning skin. Picture the dusk, the red sky darkens, and then stars everywhere. Come orbit me on the hood of this 97 Camaro. It's red like that star up there. See, find me at the bar, hitting the jukebox, singing Hit Me With Your Best Shot. I'm singing in your car and sinking fast asleep like a submarine. I'm on fire or you're the flame burning through my head. I'm the Tejano riding a pony named War. We'll start galloping away toward the ocean. You'll find us disappearing into your sun, your moon, and your rising. Or you can drive me back to the playground, get a matchbook, make me your lucky strike.
All right, there we go. So we have some time here with Jen and Sebastian. I have some questions to start us off if you all don't have any, but if you have some questions or things that you would like to hear them discuss in more detail, we would love for you to bring them to our discussion. Should we move up a little bit? Maybe? I feel like you're a little bit farther back on the stage. Yeah. There you go. Do any audience members have some questions they would like to ask? Do you have any questions on our? All right, then I'll start us off. Jen, a lot of your poems explore personhood in or with a woman's body, through a woman's body. I'm really curious about how you see some of these poems resonating in our current political landscape, our current moment. Have you had any conversations with audience members or anything like that about how some of your poems kind of resonate today?
Yeah, we're starting there.
Sorry about that.
Oh yeah, no, I'll do my best, right? So in writing this book, I think I spoke to this a little bit on the stage here, thinking about connection, right? So how we enter spaces where we feel we can share, right? And what that disclosure looks like. What is it to take an internal thing and make it external? But I also think a lot about that on the other end, right? So what does it mean to create spaces where vulnerability is possible, right? So I think about that in interpersonal terms, right? What does it mean to be a human and enter a space and the responsibility of that? But I also think about that on societal terms, right, and cultural terms. So, I think in this work, maybe not as overtly, but in work I've done since, I think about what it means to be in a culture, right, where you are, where reproductive justice is being limited, you are denied your bodily autonomy, and I think this goes beyond, women. So if you are, a person who's trans and you are denied gender affirming care, right, what does it mean to be told that your ideas and your perception of your body is somehow subordinate, right, is not valid, doesn't matter, right? And how that kind of trickles down to the very minute, right? How we interact with each other. Like, how do you have desire in that space, right? How do you have a sense of self? So I think this work is kind of my first attempt at trying to answer that question, right? Or at least exploring that experience. I think the work I've done since then is a little bit more overt in that, but I appreciate, that there's kind of a starting point there. I think that's a question that's hard to find an ending point for. So maybe I'll end there.
That's great. Thank you. I like that. Some questions are hard to end, for sure. Sebastian, you talked, some of the poems that you read had the character of Tejano. You talked about, especially in the newer poems, I think both of them maybe had that character. I'm just wondering how what function that character, I guess, serves for you in your writing and in your creative process.
Yeah. So this book is like loosely based on me. I say it's semi-autobiographical. So the character in this book is sort of like me, but it's not me. And similarly, when I was thinking about the new book poems, the Tejano character is maybe functioning in a similar way. But I think I got the idea from a nonfiction class, or this nonfiction essay by Philip Lopate, like turning yourself into a character. And but I think as a poet, we naturally gravitate towards persona, or creating a vehicle to talk about, what's going on in our lives. And so the first book, is about me kind of reflecting on, me up until being a young adult. And the new project, just kind of like a continuation, is asking these bigger questions about place and history, because the first book is focused more on this personal history, and I was able to use poems to write about myself, but of course I needed to have that distance. So creating this persona was very helpful for that, and so I took that and sort of built on that for this newer project where I'm thinking about the mythologization of Texas, right? What are the stories that we're telling about Texas or about family? So that's kind of how I'm thinking of those characters and how they function, I guess.
Would anybody like to jump in? Yeah, go ahead.
Janine? I'm sorry, not saying your name.
Oh,
Jen.
Jen.
Jennifer
You're
Whalen.
talking about establishing safe places to feel like you're in a community and you can talk. Do I understand your poems to say you think the best place for that you found is in nighttime gatherings, that is in pubs and bars and where are drinking is usually involved, or some way to lessen the barriers? Are you suggesting that?
I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I think kind of the place that I feel most confident in that is the poem itself. So thinking about poetry, like I like to think about this work Eveningful as the speaker kind of playing with the lyric space of disclosure, right? So in this space where we don't have the same confines of logic and structural argument and things like that, where there's a bit more freedom. So kind of similar to Sebastian's kind of exploration of persona that is persona, but also not persona. I'd say kind of that's where the freedom goes. Like to me, that's the space of that.
In the poem itself, as you're writing
Correct, and also the reader.
it, okay, and then
Yes.
in an audience,
Correct. Yes.
or
yes.
with, but then that's not very much community.
Well, I kind of like to think about the reader as stepping in kind of the role of the listener, right? So that the reader kind of gets this lens to the speaker that maybe other people don't. So kind of like melding all those things.
And that's the community.
Correct. Yes. So, and that can or cannot, any experience of the poems I think is valid, but that's something I'm really interested in is kind of the ways that poetry can also, like, the content of the poem can be about connection, but then also the poem itself is a vehicle of connection.
I wonder if you both could talk, kind of continuing that a little bit, about some of your choices in the writing process. So Sebastian, I think that your poems on the page have a lot of variety in line length, stanza length, things like that, repeated or not repeated stanzas. And then Jen, I think that you have a real gift for like everyday speak, but also lyric diction that kind of creates some interesting surprises. So I wonder if you could just talk about some of those writerly choices that you're making as you're composing or finalizing your poems. You want to start us off, Sebastian?
Yeah, I mean, writing is such a fascinating process, and I mean, this book took me so many years to write, but I guess, that's part of the joy of writing is, it's eventually, because as a young writer, I didn't like revising or thinking about, lines or, the forms that I was using. It was just kind of coming out as like rewriting or venting, but over time, I think I've come to think of writing as more like a conversation with the subject or with myself. And so I guess as I was putting this book together, I was trying to think of, how are the poems communicating with each other? And when it took me a long time to come up with Portrait of Us Burning as a title, but once I landed on that, I asked myself this question of, how does that idea animate these other poems that I have? And I ended up changing the titles of a lot of the poems so that I could create a more cohesive conversation between the poems, especially once I was able to kind of like follow the themes and obsessions of the poems. Because I think, when I was writing the poems, I wasn't always cognizant of that, especially since, some of the older poems in here are 15 years old, or some of the newer poems are like maybe 6 or 7 years old,
Mm-hmm.
So when I put them all together, I tried to follow those threads and think about what the poems were saying and see how, and I wanted to find out, how can I have them speak to each other? And I think focusing on Portrait of Us Burning, I think it also helped me organize the sections of the book. The first section is called Portrait of Us, which kind of loosely assembles the family of characters that you're introduced to, and then the burning, which you could think of in many ways, is the title of the second section. You can kind of see how the passions and the images or the memories that the speaker is focusing on are kind of animated or complicated by the events in the book. so that, but it's a constant, thing. It should, and I came to enjoy the struggle because initially I didn't, but that was kind of how I was thinking about the form of the book.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that about your book, Sebastian. I love kind of the titles and the way that they, move from portrait to self-portrait to footage, right? And kind of the stillness or motion of that and the persona of it. Yeah, I guess thinking about poetry and kind of regular diction, turns of phrase, kind of what I was talking about in the last question. I really appreciate poetry as a space of freedom from the ways we might perceive language, which I don't think is what language is, but language as this vehicle for logic or to kind of pin meaning down or something like that, and that poetry is actually much more open than that. When I teach poetry, I'll occasionally run into students who are resistant to poetry.
I've never heard of
Yeah, why? Who is that? And some of the kind of rebuttals they have is that it is vague and it makes meaning obscure, and I think the exact opposite about poetry, that it actually makes meaning incredibly precise, and that part of how it does that is through, right, these strange uses of language or metaphor, right? The metaphor isn't, oh, we're taking a feeling and we're putting it in a costume, right? The feeling is the metaphor. So that is the most precise way to capture it. So I try to give myself, that freedom to use language in ways that can do that. I also try to tap into the sound of the poem, right? So if the sound is going to lead me somewhere generatively, right, that I follow it. So I really just try to, it always just sounds ridiculous, like, oh, just let the poem do it, I'm just here. But that, I do, try to get in a space that is different than, my kind of normal mode through the world. So yeah, through that sound and through just, through things like metaphor and things like that. Yeah. Great.
So this question's for Sebastian, but maybe Jen has something to say also. I'm intrigued by your autobiographical poetry, and I loved your phrase a little bit ago where you said you make the poem a conversation with yourself and with the subject. And I'm curious, how do you answer the challenge of making the narrative not just emotionally personal, but the story is about you, and yet the poem is still universal and speaks to everybody? How do you, it's not even walk that line, it's like you keep it all together.
Yeah, I think it's a very fine line. I think I did struggle a lot with that. But I mean, I think there's this adage among writers where the specific is, or when you make things specific, it makes it universal in a way. And so I had to ask myself, what is this really about? I had to ask myself bigger questions, and I think, I've heard this also said about poems where you start writing a poem because you have a question about yourself or the subject, right? And I think it's also about being honest with yourself, and so when the poem isn't going far enough, where I feel like it's not saying what it needs to, I ask it a different question, and but poems don't have answers necessarily. They might, and especially when I was putting together this book, I think I kept asking myself a lot of those questions, and those would lead me to the next poems. Especially if I was like trying to make a connection between two poems, like I saw something there, but then I realized there might be a gap there, and then I would ask a question that would lead me to that next poem, or if I had a question about a phrase or my word choice, I would ask myself, am I being really honest with myself here? But it's a very vulnerable space to be in. And so it also, I think, requires time and patience with yourself to get to that point, because there's going to be a moment where you can only revise it so much because you're not there yet to ask that question that is needed or necessary for that poem. But even after this book is out, because it is a very vulnerable book that is loosely based on my life, my family's read it, and they've had questions about it too. Mostly very loving questions, or they understand that the book is also ultimately about forgiveness. But it is a tricky question, to think about, how vulnerable do I want to be, and so you have to kind of also navigate or negotiate that question within yourself. But it's also something that I really appreciate about poets, especially with your book, Jen, like the way that you're able to focus on that, a single evening or the evening full, and all these aspects of the evening, and take us on this journey, and so you also want to be able to trust the writer or the author to kind of take you on that journey, and if it feels very authentic, then it's going to work, and if it doesn't, then it's not going to be as successful. And so I think, hopefully the poems are successful in the way that they're asking the right questions, or they feel very honest in that way. So, but it's a constant struggle, even after the fact.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love what you said about sometimes you take the poem to a certain point, but you just can't take it further for whatever reason. And you mentioned earlier that some of your poems in this book were 15 years old, and then there's some that are much more recent. And I think that's a thing a lot of poets struggle with, right? Is I want to say this particular thing, but I don't have the skills, or I don't have the honesty with myself, or whatever the case. I haven't found the right metaphor to actually get it on the page. But I love what you said about that. I think there was another question. Yeah, go ahead.
I think in that book you've created a world, and that we can enter. And I'm wondering if you knew it until you had created it in your writing. When you found that image in the art museum, did that pull things together? I'm assuming that you didn't know where it was going to go when you started, but it's a world. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Well, there's some things that I knew I wanted to write about. Like I wanted this, because there are some things, about being a writer that are really great. Like I think, sometimes you ask yourself a question, or you as a writer, you give yourself an excuse to write about something that you don't know anything about. And I think that's kind of what I did with some of the book, because I think, the other thing that's behind a lot of the poems is that I grew up with my family not really talking a lot about their upbringing or their childhood, and I had to ask them those questions. And so, I asked them those questions, and some of their stories stayed with me, and so I kind of wrote towards those stories. And being the son of Mexican immigrants, I felt like, because they didn't share stories with me, I wanted to connect more to their culture, the things that they grew up on. And so I wanted to connect to some Mexican artists. The poem that I read about Jose Clemente Orozco, that is based on my time going to study abroad in Mexico, and I saw the mural there. But of course, I'm having a conversation with that painting, and when we are having those conversations, we can't escape but insert our own lives in there. And so that's kind of what animates that particular poem. But it's also how I was negotiating some of the other poems. But I also like that, in this reading tonight, that, your book, Jen, kind of has echoes of, being in conversation with arts, and you even have those QR codes that lead you to the actual arts, which, is nice when you have that ability, because it's nice for the reader to be able to look up that piece of art and see, how much do they see there? Because of course, even as a reader, right, we're not inside the author's head, and it's fun to maybe kind of note, how we as a audience, might view that painting differently. But I don't know if you want to talk about your experience with that.
Or you actually say, you found this world's creation through the questions, by finding information you didn't know. And you didn't know it until you did this.
Yeah, so I just kind of like followed it and tried to ask myself, how does it work? How does it click? So it kind of came together, by accident in a way, but it's through following the words and the feelings on the page that I discovered it, right? Or it found me, I guess you could say. But I don't know if you had a similar experience.
Yeah, and I love a lot of your aphrastic work in the book. I think it's interesting. I like I talked about. I like to think about kind of these questions that other artists have in kind of a different form, right? So I was thinking about that in terms of threshold, but I'm also kind of really interested in material as well, right? So kind of to make a painting the material aspect of that versus a poem, and that's something I'm interested a lot more in kind of the work that I'm working on right now. But yeah, obviously there's a theme throughout kind of poetry of this portrait and what it means to capture a self, right, or to capture an image. And language as a way to distill that potentially, but that is always ongoing. So yeah.
So Kenneth likes to end readings with gathering some paradise, which is just kind of thinking in the world of poetry or arts in general, what's gotten you excited recently that you could share, kind of gather together in our community tonight. What new writer have you discovered, or a book that you've read that really blew your mind? What art has helped you see your own creative life in a new way, etc. So what are some paradises you've been experiencing that you could share with us?
Trying to think of a recent book that I've read. I've been reading the new Al Yan's book, To the Moon and Back, I believe it's called, or something about the moon. It's a pink, beautiful cover. Her work is very gorgeous and illuminating. But I also like other forms of art. Like I like to increasingly think of poetry as being kind of four-dimensional, and I liked. I saw this incredible series that recently blew me away. Julio Torres's Fantasmas. If anybody hasn't watched it, you should. It's very incredible what he's able to do with storytelling and how he blurs reality and fiction, and how absurd and surreal real life can be. Fantastic show.
Yeah, I feel like I can speak to my to be read pile. I teach a lot of students, and right now I'm involved in kind of I'm negotiating a labor contract as well, and I feel like it's important to kind of speak to that in these spaces and ask that question, and the ways in which labor can make just something as just that we might take for granted, like the appreciation of art and the time to read, can make that hard. So I hope to be in that space very soon where that feels more accessible. But some poets I'm lucky to know that I'm excited to read their work. Christian Kaufman has a book called The Science of Things We Can Believe from Ghost Peach Press that I'm excited to read. And then I'm really excited to dig into my friend Reyes Ramirez's first book of poems, El Rey of Gold Teeth, from Hub City Press. So I'm looking forward to getting into that stack.
Thank you so much for sharing your books and your reading or your writing and your thoughts on poetry. This has been really wonderful. So thank you so much. Just before we close, the next Poetry at the Point reading is March 25th. featuring Mark Pfeiffer and Scott Burzon, both poets orbiting in and around the Poetry in the Woods and Babbler Poetry Society communities. So please come back on March 25th to see them. We also have a couple of events from the Poetry Center coming up in February. So February 16th will be the Sunday workshop with Allison Rollins and Jackie Germain. And then observable reading on the 17th with Allison Rollins and Jackie Germain. If you don't know Allison Rollins, she's from St. Louis, or lived in St. Louis for a while. Both amazing poets. So we've got 2 fabulous events with them in February, the 16th and 17th, and then Poetry at the Point again, March 25th. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here. Hang out, buy some books, talk to our authors. We'd love to continue the conversation.